The first proof was not a confession, a witness, or a page from the county ledger. It was a dog's paw scraping at hard dirt. Nora Bell heard it before she saw him. Scratch. Stop. Scratch again. The sound came from beyond the cemetery fence, where the grass grew tall enough to hide snakes and old enough to hide sins. Patch stood beneath the pale morning light, panting through his gray muzzle, his bad front leg trembling with every stroke. "Leave it," Nora whispered, but Patch would not leave it. For 4 days the old dog had dragged himself back to this same patch of ground, though every trip left him weaker. He had turned from fresh meat, refused the warm place beside Nora's stove, and limped back toward the cemetery, as if something beneath that dirt mattered more than hunger, comfort, or pain. That was why Silas Crowther had called him dangerous. He told Deputy Pike the dog had been tearing up graves, half mad enough to be put down before it hurt someone. Deputy Pike had warned Nora only once. If that dog wanders off Ashen Creek land again, don't expect him to come home alive. Nora should have pulled Patch away. She had enough trouble already. Crowther had accused her of cutting his fence. Her last wages were locked inside his office. And her father's name was still spat like tobacco juice outside the saloon whenever someone needed proof that a Bell could only steal, lie, or run. But Patch scraped again. This time, his paw struck wood. Nora dropped to her knees and brushed away the dirt until her nails filled with red clay. A rotten board appeared first, then the rusted edge of an old child's brass lock, then 3 carved words, half buried beneath a smear of dried mud. Voss Claim 17. Nora went still. She did not know the Voss name. She had never seen it on a deed, a grave marker, or a church record. But somewhere inside Ashen Creek Ranch, Silas Crowther had spent 20 years praying those words would never touch daylight. Nora covered the carved board with both hands before the wind could show it to anyone else. Patch stood beside her, shaking so badly that his shoulder brushed her knee. The old dog's breath came wet and uneven. Red clay clung to his muzzle. One of his front paws had started to bleed, where the nail had split against the buried wood. "You foolish old thing," Nora whispered, but there was no anger in it. She tore a strip from the hem of her work shirt and wrapped his paw tight. Patch did not pull away. He only stared toward the east, where the roofline of Ashen Creek Ranch sat black against the waking sun. That ranch had been the whole shape of Nora's life. She had learned to mend harness in its tack room. She had slept in its women's bunkhouse after her mother died of fever. She had eaten leftover beans from its cookhouse and taken every job no man wanted, hauling wash water, scraping manure, riding night fence in weather that froze the spit on her lips. Silas Crowther had always made sure folks knew he had allowed it. "Girl would have starved if I had not kept her on," he would say. People heard kindness in that. Nora heard the chain. Crowther paid her less than the men, docked her for broken tools she had not touched, and reminded her every payday that charity was not a debt owed back. Still, she had stayed. A woman with the Bell name did not get many doors opened in Gravel Ford. Not after Jacob Bell rode out one storm-black evening and never came home. Not after 3 Ashen Creek steers were found missing. Not after Crowther stood in church and said sorrowfully that some men ran faster than justice. Nora had been 17 then, old enough to understand shame, too young to fight it. Only Patch had kept waiting. For weeks after Jacob vanished, the dog slept beside the main gate and lifted his head at every hoofbeat. When no rider came, Patch followed Nora instead. He followed her through winter mud, summer dust, and 9 years of lowered voices. He grew gray before she did. He lost speed. Then a supply wagon rolled over his front leg one wet spring, and after that the ranch hands said he was finished. Patch never seemed to know it. By the time Nora led him back through the cemetery brush, the sun had climbed high enough to put a hard shine on the chapel windows. She should have gone straight to the deputy. A child's lock and a carved board buried outside consecrated ground were not small things. But Deputy Pike wore Crowther's winter coat when the weather turned cold. He rode a Crowther gelding when his own mare went lame. And 2 months ago, when Nora asked why her wages were short, Pike had told her a woman carrying her father's reputation ought to be grateful for any work at all. So Nora did not go to him. She hid the brass lock under a loose stone behind her stove and slipped the rotten board beneath her mattress, wrapped in flour sackcloth. Then she washed Patch's paw, cleaned the blood from his muzzle, and made him lie near the hearth. He slept for less than an hour. When he woke, his ears were up. Outside, wagon wheels ground into the yard. Men's voices followed. Nora looked through the warped window and saw Deputy Pike step down from the seat beside Crowther's foreman, Harlan Greaves. Harlan carried a rifle loose in one hand, as if it were only another tool. Patch pushed himself upright. "No," Nora said softly. His bad leg folded, but he forced it straight again. A knock struck the door before Nora could hide the strip of bloody cloth on the table. Pike did not wait to be invited in. He looked around the single room, taking in the stove, the cracked basin, the narrow cot, and the dog standing between him and Nora. "Crowther says that animal left ranch ground again this morning." Nora kept her body still. "Patch was with me. That is not an answer. It is the only one I have." Harlan's eyes moved to the floorboards, then to Patch's bandaged paw. He smiled without warmth. "Looks like he has been digging." Patch gave one low sound. Not a bark, not even a growl, just a warning that seemed to come from somewhere old in his chest. Pike set one hand on his revolver. "Tie him up. Now." Nora reached for the rope beside the door, but Patch backed away from it. His nose dropped to the floor. He sniffed once, twice, then limped past Pike, as if the deputy were no more than a fence post. He stopped at Harlan Greaves's boots. The old dog lowered his muzzle to the leather spur strap. Then every hair along his spine rose. Harlan's smile disappeared. Harlan Greaves stepped back as if Patch had put teeth in his skin, instead of only breath on his boot. It was a small movement. Half a pace. No more than that. But Nora saw it. Deputy Pike saw it too. "What is wrong with you?" Pike asked. Harlan looked down at the dog, then at Nora, and put his smile back on with care. "Nothing wrong with me. I just do not favor being sniffed by a half-mad animal." Patch did not move away. The old dog's nose stayed close to Harlan's spur strap. The leather was dark with sweat and trail dust, cracked along the buckle hole. One side had been mended with a strip of rawhide that did not match the other. Patch breathed it in once more and made that same deep sound in his chest. Harlan's fingers tightened around the rifle. Nora saw the motion and stepped between them. "You shoot him in my house," she said, "and you will have to explain the blood on my floorboards." Pike gave her a hard look. "This is not your house. It is Ashen Creek property. Then Crowther can come mop it himself." For a breath, the room held still around the stove heat, the dust, and Patch's ragged breathing. Then Pike reached for the rope hanging beside the door and tossed it toward Nora's feet. "Tie him." Nora did not pick it up. Harlan's eyes moved over the room again, sharper this time. He looked at the cot, the thin mattress, the flour sack folded on the shelf, the cracked blue cup by the wash basin. He was not looking like a man checking for a dangerous dog. He was looking like a man trying to remember where a frightened woman might hide something. "You been out past the cemetery?" he asked. Nora kept her face plain. "I have been where my dog went. That ground is not yours. Neither is the cemetery. That strip beyond the fence belongs to Mr. Crowther." Pike turned toward Harlan. "Since when?" Harlan's jaw worked once before he answered. "Since always." It was a poor answer, too quick and too stiff. Pike noticed, but he did not press it. Men like Pike knew which questions could cost them a horse, a winter coat, or a place at Crowther's table. Patch shifted his weight and nearly went down. Nora bent before she could stop herself, catching him under the ribs. His body felt too hot beneath the coat. The bandage around his paw had already spotted through. Pike watched her with something that might have been irritation and might have been pity if it had belonged to a better man. "You have until sundown," he said. "Chain him, sell him, or put him down yourself. If he is found loose after that, I will not argue with Crowther's men." Nora looked at Harlan. "Is that why you came? To tell me what kind of mercy Mr. Crowther prefers?" Harlan rested the rifle against his shoulder. "Mercy is letting an old dog die before he hurts someone." Patch turned his head at the sound of Harlan's voice. His ears lifted, weak but certain. Again, Harlan saw it. Again, he stepped back. This time Nora did not miss the fear under his anger. When the men left, Pike took the rope with him. Harlan paused in the doorway and looked once more at Patch's bandaged paw. "Careful where you let him dig," he said. "Old ground can make liars out of decent people." Then he shut the door. Nora waited until the wagon wheels faded past the wash shed before she moved. Her hands had started to shake. She hated that. She could face hunger, mud, insult, and long work without trembling. But fear for Patch had a way of reaching places in her that nothing else could touch. The dog sank beside the stove with a groan. "You knew him," she whispered. Patch blinked slowly. "You knew Harlan." His tail did not move. His eyes had gone dull with exhaustion. But when Nora touched the rawhide bandage on his paw, he gave one soft whine and looked toward the loose stone behind the stove. The brass lock was hidden there. Nora stared at the stone. "No," she said. "You are not dragging me back into this." Patch kept looking. Outside, the day grew hot and bright. Ranch bells rang from the lower pasture. Men shouted near the feed pens. Somewhere on the Ashen Creek side of the yard, Crowther's business went on as if a child's lock, a carved board, and an old dog's memory had not split the morning open. Nora tried to work. She scrubbed the blood from the floor. She folded her father's old blanket. She counted the coins in the tin under her cot, $1.86, and a Mexican half-reel with a hole through it. Not enough for a room. Not enough for a lawyer. Not enough to leave Gravel Ford with a lame dog and a name no one would hire. By mid-afternoon, Patch was standing again. He should not have been able to. His leg trembled so badly that Nora had to look away. Still, he limped to the door and pressed his nose against the gap at the bottom. The old dog was asking. Nora closed her eyes. Her father had once said a good cattle dog did not point where you wanted. He pointed where the trouble was. She took the brass lock from behind the stone, the carved board from beneath the mattress, and wrapped both in a feed sack. Then she tied a length of cloth around Patch's chest so she could help carry some of his weight if his leg gave out. They left by the backwash path, not the yard. The cemetery sat west of the chapel, where the town stopped pretending its dead were all equal. Good families lay inside the white fence with carved stones and iron crosses. Poor workers lay nearer the mesquite. Strangers, drifters, and men with ugly reputations were put outside the far edge, where the grass grew wild and the wind worried the soil bare. Patch did not go to any marked grave. He led Nora past the broken corner of the fence and into the tall grass beyond it. Not to the exact place where he had dug before. This time he veered 6 paces south, toward a low place where rainwater would have gathered before the ground hardened. There, he stopped. Nora crouched. At first she saw only weeds, ants, and red clay cracked like old pottery. Then she noticed the cloth. A strip of blue calico had snagged beneath a root, almost the same shade as the faded thread caught in the brass lock's hinge. It was not large, 2 fingers wide, maybe 5 inches long, but it had been folded once and stitched along one edge, the way women hemmed children's sleeves. Nora touched it with the tip of her nail. The cloth came loose, and something small fell from it into the dirt. A bead, white glass, no bigger than a seed. Nora's throat tightened. This was not ranch trash. It was not cattle gear. It was not something a grown man would carry while stealing steers in a storm. She opened the brass lock with the blade of her pocket knife. Inside the rusted lip, scratched so faintly she nearly missed it, were 2 letters. C. V. Patch gave a weak breath and lowered himself beside the hollow. Nora looked from the lock to the cloth, then to the carved board inside the feed sack. Voss Claim 17 had not belonged to a fence line. It had belonged to a child. Behind her, from the cemetery road, a horse snorted. Nora turned. Fresh boot prints marked the dust near the broken fence. One print carried a narrow spur mark, with a rawhide drag beside it. Nora did not move until the horse on the cemetery road shifted again. The sound was small, just iron tapping stone, but it carried through the hot grass like a warning bell. Patch heard it too. He tried to rise, failed once, then got his front feet beneath him with a breath that sounded torn. "Hush," Nora whispered. She slipped the brass lock and the strip of blue calico into her dress pocket. The carved board stayed inside the feed sack, pressed against her ribs beneath one arm. Whoever had come near the cemetery had not ridden all the way to the graves. The prince stopped at the broken fence, then turned back toward the road, as if the rider had watched from there and left in a hurry. Nora crouched over the nearest track. The boot had a narrow heel and a sharp inside edge. Beside it ran the faint line of a dragging spur strap, rawhide scraping dust every 3rd step. Harlan Greaves had stood in her room with that same mismatched rawhide tied through his spur buckle. Patch nosed the mark and gave a tired, bitter sound. "I know," Nora said, "but knowing and proving are not kin." She helped him into the shade of a leaning cedar and waited until the road fell quiet. No rider appeared. No rifle barrel shone through the mesquite. Still, Nora felt watched all the way back to the wash path. She could not go to Pike. She could not go to Crowther. And she could not walk into the county office with a rotten board and a child's lock and expect men who laughed at her name to open old books. There was only one man in Gravel Ford who remembered land before Crowther owned most of it. Amos Reed lived half a mile past the livery, behind the old survey shed where broken measuring chains hung from the rafters. He had once been county surveyor, back when claim lines were walked with stakes, string, and sore feet. Now, boys called him Crooked Reed because his right hand shook. Nora found him outside with a tin cup of chicory coffee between his knees. He looked at Patch first. Most people did. The dog's limp made them either laugh or pity him. Amos did neither. "That dog belonged to Jacob Bell," he said. Nora stopped at the gate. "Still does, in a manner," Amos added. The words struck deeper than insult. Nora had not heard anyone speak of her father without contempt in years. "I need to ask about land," she said. "Land is the one thing men steal slow enough to call it business." Amos lifted the latch and let her in. Inside the shed, the air smelled of dust, ink, mouse nests, and old rain. Patch lay down near the door, but his eyes stayed open. Nora set the feed sack on Amos's table and unwrapped the board. The old surveyor did not touch it at first. His wandering eye steadied. "Where did you get that?" "Beyond the cemetery." "What part beyond?" "The part Mr. Crowther's foreman says has always been Ashen Creek ground." Amos gave a dry sound that was almost a laugh. "Men say always when they do not want you asking when." He bent close to the board. The carved words were worn, but the V and the number remained clear beneath the red stain. Voss Claim 17. Amos reached for a drawer, missed the handle once, then found it. He took out cracked spectacles and a flat leather case tied with string. From the case came an old map, yellowed at the folds and dark along the edges where damp had kissed it. He spread it carefully. Nora leaned over the table. The map showed Gravel Ford before Ashen Creek Ranch spread across the West Range. Thin black lines marked claims in numbered blocks. Some names she knew. Calder, Boone, Mercer, Reed. Then, near the cemetery bend, she saw it. Voss, Claim 17. Her hand closed around the table edge. So it was real. Amos did not answer. He was staring at the lower corner of the map. Nora followed his gaze and saw the signature written there in dark brown ink. Amos Reed, County Surveyor. A cold thought entered her. "You drew this." "I drew 100 like it." "You drew the claim lines." "I walked them." "And now that claim is gone from county record." Amos removed his spectacles. The tremor in his fingers made the wire frames click against the table. Nora felt anger rising, not clean anger, but the old kind that had nowhere safe to go. "Did you help erase them?" Patch lifted his head. Amos looked at her for a long moment. "Your father asked me the same question." The room changed around those words. Dust hung still in the window light. Outside, a wagon rolled past toward town, but the sound felt far away. "My father came here 9 years ago, 3 nights before Crowther called him thief." Nora wanted to ask 10 things at once. Her mouth chose the hardest. "What did you tell him?" "I told him I was a coward." That was not the answer she expected. Amos rolled the map back with care. Then he reached for another ledger, smaller than the map case, bound in cracked black cloth. He opened it to a page filled with dates, claim numbers, and little marks in the margin. "Voss was not a man alone," he said. "Samuel Voss came with a wife, Eliza, and a little girl, Clara, 6 years old, maybe 7. They had 40 acres first, then filed for another strip along the cemetery wash, because there was water under that ground after spring floods. Not much, but enough for goats and beans." Nora touched the lock in her pocket. "CV. What happened to them?" Amos looked toward the door, where Patch lay breathing hard. "Officially they left. People do not leave a child's lock buried in the dirt." "No," Amos said. "They do not." He turned the small ledger around. On one line Nora saw Voss Claim 17. On the next, written in a different hand, the words abandoned, reverted. Beside it was a county seal pressed in fading purple ink. Then she saw another mark. The same 2 letters near the margin. C.V. But below them, written faintly in pencil, were different initials. S.C. Nora's stomach tightened. Silas Crowther. Amos shut the ledger before she could read more. Not here. The fear in his voice sharpened hers. You show me one line and close the book. I show you enough to know the ground was real. You show me enough to know you kept proof while my father died under a thief's name. Amos flinched. Patch struggled up then, slow and painful, and limped to the table. He pressed his nose against the closed ledger. Not the map, not the board, the ledger. Amos watched him and went pale. What is in it? Nora asked. Records men wanted forgotten. Crowther? Crowther wanted land. Others wanted peace. Some wanted money. Some wanted only not to be next. And you? The old man's hand settled on the ledger cover. I wanted to live long enough to regret it. A knock came at the front of the shed. Not loud, polite. Amos closed his eyes. Nora grabbed the feed sack, but Patch was already moving, not toward the back door, toward the wall beside the stove, where old survey stakes leaned in a barrel. He pushed his muzzle into them, whining low. Nora saw a loose plank behind the barrel. Amos saw her see it. Take only what he finds, he whispered. Not the ledger. Not yet. The knock came again. Mr. Reed, Harlan Greaves called from outside. Deputy Pike says there has been talk of stolen county papers. Patch hooked his teeth around the edge of the loose plank and pulled. Behind it, wrapped in oilcloth, was a narrow strip of map with one corner burned black. Nora slid it into her sleeve just as Amos opened the door. Harlan stood there with his hat in his hand and his rifle across one arm. His eyes went from Amos to Nora, to the old dog by the wall. Then he smiled. Well, he said, looks like every stray in Gravel Ford found the same hole. Harlan Greaves stepped into Amos Reed's shed, as if he had every right to be there. He held his hat in one hand and his rifle in the other. Dust marked his cuffs. A loose strip of rawhide hung from his right spur strap and dragged softly across the floorboards. Patch heard it. The old dog lifted his head, his eyes fixed on Harlan's boot, tired but certain. Nora kept her sleeve pressed tight against her side, where the burned strip of map lay hidden against her wrist. Deputy Pike sent you? Amos asked. He asked me to look in, Harlan said. There is talk of stolen county papers. Talk usually wears Crowther's boots in this town. Harlan's smile stayed polite, but it lost its warmth. Mr. Crowther worries about order. Old papers make poor people imagine old claims still matter. Sometimes they do, Nora said. Harlan looked at her. Sometimes they get people hurt. Patch pushed himself up. His bad paw touched the floor and lifted again, leaving a small red dot near the table leg. He limped between Harlan and Amos's chair, placing his thin body in front of the hidden ledger. Harlan saw the movement. So now the dog guards papers too. He guards what men are afraid to touch, Nora said. That was too much. She knew it as soon as the words left her. Harlan stepped closer. Patch gave one cracked bark and lurched forward half a foot. Nora caught him by the collar before his weak leg folded. Harlan pulled back quickly. Not like a man afraid of teeth, like a man afraid of memory. He recovered fast. Deputy Pike can search this place with a warrant by sundown. If there are county records here, Mr. Reed, I suggest you remember where loyalty ought to sit. Amos's trembling hand rested on the edge of the table. Loyalty to truth sits higher than loyalty to a ranch. Harlan put on his hat. Truth is a dangerous word when spoken by people with nothing to lose. His eyes touched Nora's sleeve once before he left. No one moved until the sound of his spur faded down the road. Then Amos sank into his chair and pulled the black ledger fully into his lap. He did not open it. He only held it like a man holding a live coal. You cannot keep coming here, he said. You have more. I have too much. Then give it to me. That is what Jacob Bell said. Nora's breath stopped. Amos looked older than he had minutes before. Your father came here 3 nights before Crowther named him a thief. He had mud on his cuffs, blood on one sleeve, and that dog at his heel. He asked about Voss Claim 17. What did you tell him? I told him to leave it buried. And he did not. No, the answer did not make Jacob guilty. Somehow, it made him closer. Nora looked down at Patch. The dog's sides moved fast. The fight had cost him more than he wanted her to see. Did my father show you proof? She asked. Not to me. Amos's voice lowered. But a shirt can tell things a man is too afraid to say. Go see Ruth Calder. The wash house stood behind the mercantile, where steam rolled from the windows and wet sheets hung like pale ghosts from ceiling lines. Ruth Calder stood over a tub with her sleeves tied high, beating a man's shirt against a board as if it had wronged her. She did not look surprised to see Nora. "No work today," Ruth said. "I came about my father." The board stopped, only for a moment. Then Ruth went back to scrubbing. "Dead men bring poor wages. Amos Reed said you washed Jacob Bell's shirt the night before Crowther called him thief. I washed half the county's shirts. Not all of them had blood on one sleeve." Ruth's hands stilled in the water. Patch limped past Nora and moved between the tubs. He did not sniff at the baskets of fresh linen or the pile of ranch towels. He went straight to a cabinet near the back wall, swollen from steam and tied shut with twine. Ruth turned sharply. "Get him away from there." Nora looked at the cabinet. "What is in it?" "Old things. Then old things can wait to be looked at." Ruth's face hardened. For a second, Nora thought the woman would call for Pike. Instead, Ruth wiped her hands on her apron and untied the twine herself. Inside were laundry tags, lost buttons, torn collars, and small parcels wrapped in brown paper. Ruth reached behind a stack of flour sacks and pulled out one parcel tied with blue thread. "I should have burned it," she said. She opened it on the table. Inside lay a torn strip of men's shirt cuff. The cotton had yellowed with age. One edge held a dark stain gone nearly black. In the seam, caught where the cloth had ripped, was red clay. Nora knew mud. She had scraped Cattle Creek mud from boots, wagons, and saddle skirts all her life. Creek mud dried gray and cracked flat. This clay was fine and red, the same color that had filled her nails beyond the cemetery fence. Ruth watched her see it. "He came after midnight," Ruth said. "Jacob." He knocked at the back door with Patch beside him. "Asked if I had washed any child's blue sleeve that week." Nora touched the brass lock in her pocket. "Did you?" Ruth swallowed. "A little sleeve came through 2 days before. Blue calico. Torn at the cuff. I did not know whose it was." "Why did you lie?" "My son was 14 and working Crowther's lower pasture. Harlan Greaves came the next morning. Told me boys could be blamed for grown men's crimes if their mothers talked too freely." Patch lowered himself beside the table, exhausted. His ears stayed turned toward Ruth. "Was my father drunk?" Nora asked. Ruth shook her head. "Did he smell like saloon whiskey?" "No." "What did he smell like?" Ruth looked toward the window, where afternoon light shook through steam. "Wet grass, gun smoke, and cemetery clay." The words entered Nora slowly. For 9 years, the town had placed Jacob near missing cattle and dirty whiskey. Ruth's cuff placed him somewhere else, near the grave, near the Voss child, near whatever Crowther had buried. Ruth reached back into the parcel and drew out a bent laundry pin wrapped in a scrap of blue calico. "He said one thing before he left," she whispered. Nora waited. Ruth looked at Patch. "He said, 'If I do not come back, follow the dog.'" Patch's eyes opened at the sound of Jacob's old command, or maybe only at the grief in Ruth's voice. Then the church bell struck. 3 sharp rings. A pause. 3 more. Ruth went pale. "That is Pike's public notice bell." Nora moved to the window. Across the street, people were gathering at the mercantile post. Deputy Pike stood with a hammer in one hand and a paper in the other. Harlan Greaves waited beside him. Farther back, mounted on a clean bay horse, Silas Crowther watched without needing to speak. Pike nailed the paper high. The black letters were large enough for Nora to read through steam and glass. "Dangerous Animal Order." Below it was Patch's name. Below that was the sentence Crowther had dressed up as law: to be shot on sight if found loose after sundown. The crowd outside the mercantile grew fast. Men came from the feed store. Women stepped out of the dry goods shop, with threads still looped around their fingers. Boys climbed the hitching rail until Deputy Pike barked them down. Everyone wanted to see the paper nailed to the post, because in Gravel Ford a public notice was never just paper. It was permission. Permission to point. Permission to whisper. Permission to stop pretending mercy had anything to do with law. Nora stood behind the washhouse glass with Ruth Calder at her shoulder and Patch breathing hard near her skirt. "To be shot on sight," Ruth said quietly. "He means to make every man in town his gun." Across the street, Silas Crowther sat mounted on his clean bay horse, gloved hands folded over the saddle horn. He did not look at the notice. He looked at Nora. That was worse. Crowther lifted one hand and crooked 2 fingers. Not a command shouted across the street. Not a threat. An invitation. Nora stepped away from the window. "I will not go to him." Ruth caught her wrist. You will if you want to know what he is offering. I know what men like him offer. No, Ruth said. You know what they take. Offers are how they make the taking look decent. Nora looked down at Patch. The old dog's eyes were half closed. The bandage around his paw had darkened again. Every mile, every floorboard, every memory had been pulled out of him at a cost. If she walked away now, maybe he would live. If she kept following what Jacob left behind, Patch might not see another dawn. Crowther waited in the street like a man certain time belonged to him. Nora crossed over. The crowd quieted as she approached. Deputy Pike stood near the post, thumbs hooked in his belt. Harlan Greaves leaned against the mercantile wall. One boot crossed over the other. His rawhide spur strap hung loose. Patch saw him and stiffened. Nora kept one hand low on the dog's neck. Crowther removed his hat. His hair was silver at the temples, his face lined in a way that made people mistake age for wisdom. Miss Bell, he said, this has gone farther than it needed to. You nailed my dog's death to a post. I nailed public safety to a post. He has harmed no one, not yet. Crowther's voice stayed gentle. But frightened animals and frightened people are much alike. They bite when cornered. A few people murmured. It sounded like agreement because fear often did. Crowther leaned slightly from the saddle. I am prepared to be kind. Leave Gravel Ford before tomorrow noon. Take the dog. I will release your wages, add $20, and tell Pike the animal order has been satisfied. $20. For Nora, it was a month of food, a room for a while, medicine for Patch's leg, a way out. That was how temptation entered. Not dressed as greed, dressed as relief. And if I stay? She asked. Crowther's eyes did not change. Then law will have to do what kindness could not. Patch gave a low whine, not at Crowther, at the sound of a wagon passing behind them. Nora turned. The wagon belonged to the chapel sexton, loaded with split cedar posts for the cemetery fence. One post near the top had been marked with a small cut in the shape of a crossbar and hook. Patch pulled toward it so suddenly, Nora nearly lost her grip. The dog limped past Pike, past the staring boys, straight to the wagon. He shoved his nose between the cedar posts and whined again. The sexton frowned. Get him off there. Nora reached in and touched the marked post. The cut was old, blackened by weather. Not a brand, not decoration, a survey mark. She had seen one like it that morning on Amos Reed's old map. Crowther's horse shifted. Only once, but Nora heard the leather creak. Patch, she whispered. The dog pressed his nose harder against the post, then looked toward the west road. Ruth's words came back. If I do not come back, follow the dog. Nora understood then that Jacob had not spoken out of panic. He had given instruction, not to Ruth, not only to Nora, to anyone brave enough to trust Patch when human records failed. Crowther saw understanding cross her face. His kindness ended. Miss Bell, he said, do not mistake an old dog's twitching for providence. No, Nora said. I mistake it for memory. She pulled the cedar post from the wagon before anyone could stop her. Beneath the marked side, wedged into a split in the wood and sealed with pitch, was a narrow roll of cloth. The crowd leaned forward. Pike reached for it. Nora stepped back. This is cemetery material, Pike snapped. Town property. It was in the load before you nailed the order. That does not make it yours. Patch placed himself between Pike and Nora. His legs trembled, but he stood. Nora broke the pitch with her thumbnail. Inside the cloth lay a strip of paper, browned and brittle, folded around a rusted nail. The writing was faded, but not gone. 3 words were clear. Reed line, false. Below them was a rough drawing. Cemetery fence, wash hollow, lower pasture, and a small X near the old cedar posts. At the bottom, in cramped handwriting, was a line Nora knew from the only birthday card her father had ever managed to write. Nora, if men call me thief, ask where Crowther moved the fence. Her hand tightened around the paper until it almost tore. The street blurred. For 9 years she had imagined Jacob running from law, running from shame, sometimes, on cruel nights, running from her. But he had been leaving a trail, not a clean trail, not one safe enough for a child to follow. A desperate one, made from marked wood, old maps, a dog's nose, and scraps hidden where Crowther's men would not think to look. Jacob Bell had not trusted the county ledger. He had trusted Patch. Crowther's voice cut through the murmuring crowd. Anyone can write a dead man's name. Nora looked up. He was calm again, but the calm had effort in it. Pike took a step toward her. Hand that over. No, that paper may be evidence of theft. It is evidence of something. Harlan pushed off the wall. Could be Jacob's own fraud. Man caught stealing cattle might invent all kinds of stories. Patch turned toward Harlan so fast his bad paw buckled. He fell to one knee, scrambled up, and barked once. The sound was broken, but it struck Harlan harder than a clean bite. The foreman's hand dropped toward his rifle. A gasp went through the crowd. Crowther spoke without raising his voice. Harlan. The hand stopped. That single word told Nora more than a shout would have. Crowther controlled the gun. Pike controlled the paper. Fear controlled the town. But Patch controlled the one thing none of them could forge. Memory. Ruth stepped from the washhouse doorway, holding the torn cuff wrapped in blue thread. Amos Reed appeared at the edge of the street, breathless, his hat crooked, the black ledger clutched beneath his coat. Neither of them looked brave. They looked afraid, but they were there. Nora folded Jacob's note and placed it inside her bodice. Then she looked at the public notice. Sundown was less than 3 hours away. If Patch is dangerous, she said, loud enough for the crowd to hear, then let him be dangerous in front of everyone. At the cemetery fence, before sunset. Pike frowned. What are you asking? Nora looked at Crowther. I am asking why a rancher who owns half this county is afraid of where an old dog wants to walk. No one spoke. Then Patch turned from the wagon and began limping toward the west road. Not fast, not strong, but certain. By the time Patch reached the cemetery road, half of Gravel Ford had followed. They came because of the notice. They came because of Crowther. They came because people who would not risk a whisper in private often found courage enough to watch trouble from a distance. The sun hung low over the west ridge, turning the cemetery fence the color of old bone. Inside the white rails, proper graves sat in rows. Outside them, the grass grew wild around stones without names. Patch stopped at the broken corner of the fence. His chest worked hard. Foam gathered at the edge of his mouth. Nora crouched beside him and felt heat pouring through his coat. We can stop, she whispered. The old dog did not look at her. He looked at the ground. Crowther rode up last, slow enough to remind everyone he did not hurry for poor people's accusations. Deputy Pike walked beside his horse. Harlan Greaves stood near the crowd with his rifle low, the rawhide on his spur dragging through the dust. Amos Reed came with the black ledger under his coat. Ruth Calder carried Jacob's torn cuff wrapped in cloth. Neither came close at first. Fear still had its hand on them. Crowther dismounted and removed his gloves finger by finger. Well, he said, let us see what Miss Bell and her dog believe the law has missed. A few men chuckled. Nora took Jacob's note from her bodice. The paper shook in her hand, but her voice did not. My father wrote this before he disappeared. He said the read line was false. He said to ask where Crowther moved the fence. Crowther did not reach for the note. He only looked at Pike. The deputy stepped forward. That paper was removed from cemetery property. It was hidden in a fence post, Nora said. Town cemetery material. It was my father's writing. Pike held out his hand. Then it may be evidence. Hand it over. Nora knew that tone. It was law used like a locked gate. No. Pike's mouth tightened. Do not make me take it. Patch pushed himself upright with a low sound. His legs trembled under him. Crowther sighed. Soft enough to sound sad. Nora, you have been misled by grief. I do not blame you for wanting your father innocent. Every child wants that. I was not a child when he vanished. No, Crowther said. But you were young enough to remember him kindly. That hurt because it was almost gentle. Then he turned to the crowd. Jacob Bell was caught with missing cattle near the lower wash. This county saw the tracks. This county heard the testimony. Now his daughter brings scraps, mud, and a dying dog to accuse men who kept this town fed. Ruth lowered her eyes. Amos shifted his weight, but said nothing. Nora felt the crowd moving away from her without taking a step. Patch moved instead. He limped past the grave where he had first scratched, past the low hollow where Nora had found the blue cloth, and toward a line of cedar posts stacked near the fence. The sexton had dropped them there for repairs. Patch sniffed each one, then turned away. Not those. He kept going. Harlan followed 3 paces behind, rifle still low. Dogs wandering. Patch reached a bare patch of ground where the grass thinned in a straight line running south from the cemetery corner toward Ashen Creek pasture. He lowered his nose and began to trace it. Nora saw it then. A buried line. Not a grave, not a trail, a fence line, old enough for grass to have swallowed the post holes. Amos Reed saw it too. "Wait," he said. Crowther's face changed for the smallest moment. Nora caught it. So did Patch. The dog stopped at a sunken spot in the clay and pawed once. His bandage split. Blood marked the dust. "Enough," Crowther said. It was the first hard word he had spoken. Pike reached Nora and took Jacob's note from her hand before she could fold it away. She grabbed his wrist. "That is mine." "That is evidence," Pike said. "Against who?" "Against whoever forged it." The words landed exactly where Crowther wanted them. Several people murmured. Harlan smiled again. Nora felt something inside her sway. Forged. It was such an easy word. Easy enough to kill a dead man twice. Patch pawed again at the sunken spot. He was too weak to dig. His claws barely scratched the crust. Nora dropped beside him and used her hands. The clay was hard. A man in the crowd said she had lost her senses. Another told Pike to pull her away before the dog bit someone. Ruth made a small sound but did not speak. Then Nora's fingers hit stone. She cleared a flat edge, then another. Under the dirt lay the top of a boundary marker, half buried and tilted sideways. Old chisel marks crossed its face. A number emerged first. 17. Amos came forward, forgetting fear for one breath. "That is a claim stone." Crowther turned on him. "Old marker stones are moved all the time, not with a survey notch cut that deep." Pike still held Jacob's note. "Mr. Reed, unless you can produce current county record, this is nothing but buried rock." Amos opened his coat. Harlan lifted the rifle. "Not all the way, just enough." Amos stopped. The ledger remained hidden. Nora saw the old man's courage fail in front of her and hated herself for understanding why. Crowther looked down at the claim stone, then at Patch. "There. The dog found a rock. Shall we let that undo 20 years of lawful ownership?" Patch turned his head toward Harlan. The rawhide strap dragged once in the dirt. The old dog's body changed. He was no longer following scent from the ground. He was following a memory standing in front of him. Patch lunged. It was not a strong lunge. Any young dog would have crossed the distance in a blink. Patch made only 2 desperate strides before his bad leg folded. Still, he reached Harlan's boot and snapped at the rawhide spur strap. Harlan cursed and kicked. The blow caught Patch in the ribs. Nora heard it more than saw it. Patch rolled onto his side with a cry that turned the crowd silent. Nora went to him on her knees. "You touch him again," she said, but her voice broke. Harlan raised the rifle. Dangerous animal order. Pike did not stop him. Crowther did not speak. For one terrible second, Nora understood the price of continuing. Patch's body under her hands was thin, hot, and shaking. His breath came in shallow pulls. The claim stone lay half uncovered behind her. Jacob's note was in Pike's hand. Amos had swallowed his testimony. Ruth was still holding the cuff like a woman holding a sin. Nora could save Patch if she stopped. Maybe. She bent over the dog and pressed her face to his dusty neck. "All right," she whispered. "All right. We are done." Patch opened one eye. Then, with the last strength in him, he stretched his muzzle toward Harlan's boot. Not the man. The spur. Something hung from the torn rawhide where his teeth had caught it. A small metal piece had come loose and fallen into the dust near Nora's hand. She picked it up before Harlan saw. It was half of a broken spur rowel, dark with age, its edge bent inward. On one side, stamped so small she had to hold it close, were 2 letters, A.C. Ashen Creek. On the other side was a dried line of red clay packed into the groove. The same clay as the grave, the same clay as Jacob's cuff. Harlan saw it then. So did Crowther. Nora closed her fist around the metal. Patch had not attacked. He had taken back a piece of the night her father disappeared. Before Pike could see exactly what Patch had taken, Nora tucked the broken spur piece beneath the cuff of her sleeve. Harlan Greaves wiped dust from his trousers, but his eyes followed her hand. "That dog attacked me," he said. Patch lay on his side in the grass, breath shallow, ribs fluttering under Nora's palm. His mouth was open. The old dog tried once to lift his head toward Harlan's boot and could not. Nora looked at Pike. "You saw him kick a crippled dog. I saw a dangerous animal lunge at a man. You saw what Crowther needed you to see." Pike's face hardened. Careful. Crowther stepped between them with the calm of a man separating children. Enough. Miss Bell has made her display. Mr. Reed has shown us a buried stone. Mrs. Calder has waved old cloth. None of it changes title, deed, or county seal. Amos held the ledger tighter beneath his coat. Nora saw the old fear returning to him. It was in Ruth, too. It was in the crowd most of all. They had watched the claim stone come out of the earth. They had watched Patch pull evidence from Harlan's spur. Still, Crowther's voice had weight because it sounded like order. Order was easier to trust than truth. Nora bent and slid both arms under Patch. He was heavier than he looked, not with flesh, but with age and pain, and all the miles he had spent carrying a dead man's memory. Ruth came forward. Bring him to the wash-house. Pike moved to block them. Animal order still stands. Ruth looked toward the notice nailed at the mercantile. That order says if found loose after sundown. He is not loose. She is carrying him. A murmur passed through the crowd. Someone gave a short laugh. Pike did not like being laughed at. Crowther raised one hand. Let her take the dog. Mercy costs us nothing when law remains intact. Nora knew Mercy had not saved Patch. Crowther had allowed him to live because a dead dog in front of witnesses might harden soft hearts. She carried Patch down the road with Ruth beside her, and Amos a few steps behind. Every breath from the dog sounded borrowed. The crowd did not follow at first. Then one woman came, then a boy, then two ranch hands, who kept their hats low. By the time they reached Ruth's wash-house, there were enough people outside to make the windows dark. Inside, Ruth cleared a table and spread old towels over it. Nora laid Patch down. He whimpered when his ribs touched wood. Broken? Nora asked. Ruth pressed gently along the dog's side. Bruised hard, maybe cracked. If he makes it through the night, it will be because he is too stubborn to die. Nora's throat tightened. Patch's eyes opened at her hand. I should have stopped, she whispered. Amos stood near the stove, staring at the black ledger, as if it were judging him. No, he said. Stopping is how men like Crowther build towns. Ruth turned sharply. Do not dress yourself up too fine, Amos. You stopped for 9 years. I know. The words had no defense in them. He placed the ledger on the table beside Patch. The cover was warped, the corners chewed by damp. When he opened it, the pages smelled of mildew and old ink. This is not the county ledger, he said. It is my field copy. Surveyors kept them when official books went missing, burned, or changed hands too often. Nora leaned over the page. Lines of names ran down the columns. Voss, Calder, Boone, Mercer, Bell, and others. Beside each name were acreage numbers, boundary marks, water notes, and dates. On the Voss line, the original 40 acres had been crossed with one thin stroke. Beneath it, someone had written abandoned, but the ink did not match. Amos pointed to the margin. Here, claim 17, the cemetery wash. It was never abandoned. It was transferred to Crowther, not directly. That is how he hid it. First to a dead cousin in Black Pine, then to a cattle company that existed for 6 months, then into Ashen Creek. Ruth looked sick. How many? Amos turned 2 more pages. Nora counted the altered lines. 1, 3, 7, 11. 12 families, Amos said. Some left. Some died. Some were made into thieves, drunkards, debtors, or fools before they could argue. The room seemed to shrink. This was no longer about clearing Jacob's name. It had never been only about Jacob. Crowther had not stolen one field. He had stolen memory itself, one official word at a time. Outside, someone knocked on the wash-house door. Everyone froze. A man's voice came through. It is Ben Sutter, stage office. Ruth opened the door, only a hand's width. Ben Sutter stood there holding his hat. He was thin, sunburned, and nervous enough to keep looking down the street. I heard what happened. There is a land examiner due on tomorrow's East Stage. Elias Wren, Territorial Office. Coming for a dispute up near Dry Fork. Amos looked up. Nora felt the name settle into the room like a tool set on a table. Can he read survey records? She asked. Ben gave a quick nod. That is what they pay him for. Will he stop for this? Not if Crowther reaches him first. Ruth shut the door and barred it. The next hour passed in low voices. Amos copied the altered lines onto clean paper because the ledger was too precious to risk alone. Ruth wrapped Jacob's cuff, the blue calico, and the laundry pin in separate cloths. Nora set the burned map strip beside the broken spur rowel and the brass lock marked C. V. Each thing was small. Together, they made a road. Patch slept through most of it, if sleep was the word for the thin, uneasy place where pain let him drift. Once, near dusk, his legs twitched as if he were running after someone through grass. Nora touched his head. "You have done enough." His tail moved once. Not a wag, just an answer. At full dark, a stone struck the washhouse wall. Then another. A voice outside called, "Crowther says hand over the dog and this ends." A second voice laughed. "Hand over the papers, too." Ruth reached for the shotgun under the wash counter. Nora stopped her. "No, they will break in. Then they will do it in front of witnesses." She opened the door before Ruth could argue. 3 men stood outside. 2 worked Ashen Creek. The third was Harlan Greaves. Behind them, half hidden near the alley mouth, Deputy Pike watched. Harlan's gaze went to Nora's sleeve, then to the table behind her. "Mr. Crowther is willing to let this be settled quiet," he said. Still, Nora stepped onto the threshold. "Tell Mr. Crowther quiet is finished." Harlan's face darkened. "You think that old dog can save you?" "No," Nora said. "I think he already saved 12 families from staying buried." The men behind Harlan shifted. One looked at the ground. Pike stayed in the alley and did nothing. That was his answer to everything. Nora raised her voice so the people gathered across the street could hear. "Tomorrow, at the cattle market, when the East Stage comes in, bring anyone who lost land to Ashen Creek. Bring any deed Crowther called worthless. Bring any shame this town made you carry for him." A window opened above the mercantile. Then another. Harlan took a step toward her. Ruth's shotgun clicked behind Nora's back. He stopped. Inside, Patch tried to stand. His paws slid on the towel. Nora heard him and turned. The old dog had lifted his head toward the west, toward the cattle market road, toward tomorrow. Nora looked back at Harlan. "If your master wants the truth buried," she said, "tell him to bring a bigger shovel." Harlan left without another word. By morning, Gravel Ford would have to choose whether it feared Silas Crowther more than it wanted its dead named correctly. By 9 the next morning, the cattle market was full. Wagons lined the church square. Ranch hands leaned against rails. Women stood beneath awnings with baskets forgotten at their feet. Men who had lost land to Ashen Creek came quietly, carrying old deeds in coat pockets and shame in their faces. They did not stand together at first. Fear kept distance between them. Nora arrived with Patch in Ruth Calder's wash wagon. The old dog lay on folded towels, his ribs bound with cloth, his silver muzzle resting near Nora's hand. He had not walked that morning. He had tried, and failed, and looked ashamed of it, until Nora knelt beside him. "You already walked far enough," she had whispered. Now the market noise bent around him. Some people stared. Some looked away. Silas Crowther stood near the auction platform in a dark coat, clean hat, clean gloves, and the calm expression of a man attending business. Deputy Pike waited beside him. Harlan Greaves stood near the rail, one spur strap freshly tied. Too freshly. Amos Reed came with the field ledger under his arm. Ruth carried Jacob's torn cuff, the blue calico, and the brass lock marked C. V. Ben Sutter kept watching the east road for the stage. Crowther spoke first. "Gravel Ford has indulged grief long enough," he said. "Miss Bell has accused men without legal proof, disturbed cemetery ground, removed property, and used a dangerous animal to threaten citizens." Pike stepped forward. "Any papers taken from county or ranch land must be surrendered." "There it is," Ruth said under her breath. The first gate closing. Pike reached for Amos's ledger. Amos pulled it back, but his hands shook. Crowther's voice softened. "Mr. Reed, no one wants to shame an old man. Hand it over before you are made responsible for whatever falsehoods are inside." Amos looked at the crowd. For one painful moment, Nora thought he would give it up. Then Patch lifted his head from the wagon and gave a thin, broken bark. Not loud, not strong. Enough. Amos held the ledger tighter. No. The word surprised even him. Crowther's jaw moved once. Harlan laughed. "All this for Jacob Bell?" "The man stole cattle and ran. I was there when we found the tracks." Nora looked at him. "You were where?" "At the lower wash." Then why did my father's cuff carry cemetery clay? Ruth unfolded the cloth and held up the torn cuff. I washed it that night. Red clay in the seam. Gun smoke in the cloth. No whiskey. Crowther turned toward her. Mrs. Calder, grief and age change memory. Ruth's face flushed. Her son stood in the crowd, a grown man now, head lowered. Crowther saw him too. Some families, Crowther said gently, still depend on honest work. Ruth nearly folded. Her hand dropped. Then her son stepped out of the crowd. Ma, just one word. Ruth raised the cuff again. I lied once because I was afraid. I will not do it twice. A murmur moved through the market. Ben Sutter shouted from the road. Stage! The east stage rolled in under a cloud of dust. A lean man in a brown travel coat stepped down with a leather case and a face made narrow by sun. Ben hurried to him, speaking fast. The man looked toward the crowd. Elias Wren, he said. Territorial Land Office. I understand there is a boundary dispute. Crowther smiled as if he had expected him. A misunderstanding, Mr. Wren. Not worth delaying official travel. Nora held up the broken spur rowel. Then it will not take long. Wren did not take her word. He did what honest officials did when they were worth anything. He asked for the pieces. Amos opened the field ledger. Ruth laid out the cuff, the lock, and the blue cloth. Nora placed the burned map strip, Jacob's note, and the broken spur rowel on an upturned crate. Pike protested at each item. Stolen property, unverified paper, disturbed ground, dead man's writing. Wren listened, then examined them anyway. He compared Amos's field ledger to the current county book Pike finally produced from his saddlebag. He checked dates. He checked seal pressure. He checked acreage numbers. At the Voss line, his finger stopped. This transfer was entered after the abandonment date. Pike shifted. Clerical errors happen. Not usually in 3 inks, across 12 claims. The crowd changed then. Not loudly. It changed the way cattle change before storm, heads lifting one by one. Crowther removed his gloves. Mr. Wren, old field copies do not overturn lawful ownership. No, Wren said, but they can prove the lawful record was altered. Harlan stepped forward. Jacob Bell altered it. He had reason. He was caught stealing Ashen Creek cattle. Patch moved. Nora felt it before she saw it. The old dog pushed himself up in the wagon, trembling so hard the boards knocked beneath him. His eyes fixed on Harlan's right boot. The fresh strap could not hide everything. One spur rowel was newer than the other. Wren noticed Nora looking. Mr. Greaves, your spur. Harlan's face tightened. What about it? Nora held up the broken piece. Patch took this from your strap yesterday. It bears the Ashen Creek stamp. It has cemetery clay in the groove. Harlan spat into the dust. A dog's mouth proves nothing. No, Wren said. But a broken rowel matched to a missing half might. Pike put a hand on his revolver. This is enough. Patch barked again. Harlan flinched. The crowd saw it. Not the bark. The flinch. Crowther saw it too. And for the first time he looked at Harlan like a man studying a weak plank. Mr. Greaves, Crowther said, if you carried out some private quarrel with Jacob Bell, now would be the time to confess it. Harlan stared at him. There it was, Crowther's final kindness. A rope handed to another man's neck. You told me to scare him off, Harlan said. Crowther's face went still. The market went quiet enough to hear the horses breathe. Harlan looked around, wild now. He found the child's grave. Bell did. He had that dog with him and a scrap of map. Said he was taking it to Santa Laura. I was to stop him, that was all. Nora's hand closed on the wagon rail. What child? Wren asked. No one answered. Ruth held up the brass lock. C. V. Clara Voss. Amos turned the ledger so Wren could see. Samuel Voss, Eliza Voss, Clara Voss. Claim 17. Marked abandoned after the fence was moved. Harlan's voice dropped. She was already dead when I saw her. Crowther turned sharply. Be silent. But silence had broken. It would not come back. Harlan pointed toward Crowther. The Voss family would not sign. Crowther's men burned them out. The girl was hurt in the smoke and confusion. They buried her beyond the fence because a grave with a name would raise questions. Years later, Jacob found the marker and the lock. Crowther said Bell was stealing cattle before Bell could speak. The crowd had no single sound. It was breath, anger, disbelief, and old shame waking at once. Pike moved toward Harlan. Wren stopped him. Deputy, you will not touch that man until I have his statement. Pike drew himself up. You have no authority over my prisoner. Perhaps not, Wren said, but I have authority over territorial land records, and that county book is now evidence. Crowther tried once more. These are accusations from a frightened foreman. Nora looked at the crowd. Then ask the stone. Ask the map. Ask the cuff. Ask the 12 families in that ledger. Ask why my father's note knew the fence had moved before any of you did. Her voice shook, but it carried. And ask why a dying dog remembered what honest men tried to forget. Patch lowered his head. Spent. No one laughed at him now. By noon, Wren had sealed the county book, Amos's field ledger, and the evidence in his case. Pike surrendered his badge pending inquiry after 3 men swore they had seen him take cattle payments from Crowther. Harlan was held in the livery office under guard. Crowther was not dragged away in chains. Men like him rarely fell that simply. But when Wren ordered Ashen Creek's disputed titles suspended, and when the first widow stepped forward with a deed Crowther had called worthless, the rancher's name began to lose the thing that had protected it longest. By dusk, a wire had gone to Santa Laura requesting a territorial warrant for Silas Crowther's land transfers. Wait. That evening, Nora took Patch back to the cemetery. Not to dig. Ruth came with a lantern. Amos came with 2 cedar markers. Ben Sutter brought nails. No crowd followed. Public justice had been loud enough. This part belonged to the quiet. They placed 1 marker beyond the fence where the little brass lock had been found. Clara Voss, daughter of Samuel and Eliza. Then, nearer the cedar line, Amos set the 2nd marker. Jacob Bell, not thief, witness. Nora stood over it for a long time. I was angry at you, she whispered, for leaving, for letting them name you before I could know you. The wind moved through the dry grass. Patch lay between the 2 markers, his head on his paws, eyes half closed. He looked smaller without a mystery to carry. Nora knelt and touched his torn ear. You followed him home, she said. Patch's tail moved once in the dust. Behind her, Ruth's lantern made the new names glow against the dark. For 20 years the buried had waited. For 9 years a dog had remembered. And at last, on the edge of a forgotten cemetery, Nora Bell understood that justice had not arrived because the powerful allowed it. It arrived because the loyal refused to leave.